I've been working on pretty weather. Let's move to when the weather is not so pretty. So what can we do there? Well, I think first thing, again, shadows, highlights. In this case, this is actually a black sand beach, so I don't need to go this far with it because it's supposed to be. I'm probably going to go further than it looked. Because the hard part about a black sand beach is most people don't see them, so it's like, why is the beach so dark? So I always cheat my photos from this area and kind of went a little bit further with them. So kind of open up the shadows there. We can go over here to our crop tool, and then maybe just grab my straighten, drag along there. You can see it's got a little bit of a curvature to it. If that bugs you right away, I've been doing this a little bit later in the workflow, but you could go straight down to your lens corrections here and enable that profile correction, and it should take care of most of that. Back up here to basic, whites and blacks, option or alt click. I'm not going to push this all the way to the blacks, but I'll go until I get a couple little specks there. Let's go take the sky. We'll use our graduated filter on it and bring the exposure down. So this is where I have a little bit of fun, and that is, if I have a gray blah sky, I'm not going to go crazy like make it really dark. But if I have a blah sky, I'll pull it back, and then I'll crank up some clarity in it too. So basically, just go with it. If you weren't really lucky on the pretty sunrise or the pretty sunset, then go dramatic. Push it a little bit. So between pulling down your exposure but not going too far, maybe even a little bit on the highlights, and then cranking up that clarity, you'll get a much more dramatic sky. Like so. And that might be a little too much, so I'll pull back there. Alright, let's see here. We have a little spot. So let's go grab my spot removal brush. Click on that. And sadly, there are more. They were hiding, but they're there. I'm not going to go get rid of all of them because you guys will want to shoot me, but I'll get rid of a couple of them. Little side note for you. When you bring down the exposure in the sky and when you add a lot of clarity to your sky, you're going to bring out spots even more. So what might have been a spot that kind of faded away into something, as you start to add those effects to it, it actually gets a little bit worse. There's a little spot down here. Looks like, I don't know if that's a footprint or... It wasn't a footprint because it's like I almost put a fence around me. I'm like, give me 5 minutes, everybody stay away. Just give me 5 minutes, don't walk around me. But you can, it's not just a spot removal tool. You can actually click and paint. Get rid of it that way. This is that ice beach, that iceberg beach that you might see pictures of in Iceland. And if you could imagine, the day that I went, it's the only piece of ice. I see pictures, there's literally 1,000 of them. And the day that I went, there was one. One. I know. Yeah, so anyway. And it's big. I mean, it's like you think like I can move it. It's like maybe like this big. But yeah, there's one. So it's all about the tides and everything like that, and I just didn't time it right. Let's see here. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this. We can go down here to detail. Again, I'm going to crank it up until there's texture. And then pull back a little bit. I took my brush on this one, and I added some clarity to the brush. And then what I did is I just went over here and I just painted over the ice, and then I think I went and added some saturation to it too. And what the saturation did is it gave it a little bit of blue. Because it's ice, I feel like it should be blue. Maybe not, but that's how it felt. Alright. And then come down here, hit that with a little bit of a vignette there. So, that was where we started. After. Before, after. Cool. What I say about questions? I'll take it. No. Go ahead. I give you permission.
When the main focus of your photo is off-center, why do you use the vignette instead of the radial filter?
Good question. See, we were.
Aren't you glad you took it?
I felt that it was going to be a worthwhile question. I'm just teasing. So the question was, in a photo where your main center of focus is off center, basically, would you use the vignette, or there's another tool that we can use that I'll show you here? And yes, I absolutely would. I used it there. On this photo, it's tough. I could go either way with the vignette. I don't mind it as much. But sometimes you will find a photo. In fact, let me see. This is actually a really good example. I'll kind of go over here, make everything bright, add a little bit of clarity to it, warm it up a little bit. There's not too much here. So to me, if I go to the effect panel and I just add the vignette, to me it kind of loses something, right? Also think portrait. Right? Think portrait where somebody might not be dead center in the photo and their head's up a little bit higher toward the top of the photo. Well, one of the things that we can do is instead of use the vignette, I go to the radial filter. All these filters do the same thing. They just do it in a different shape. The brush lets us brush. The graduated filter gives you a line. The radial filter lets you do it with a circle. So I could bring the exposure down and then click and drag. And now it's like I have this little spotlight that I can drag around. If you go down here toward the bottom, you'll see you can even feather it more. You can feather it more or less here. I could spread it out a little bit there. It's probably too dark, so I can pull that back. But that's before, that's after. All right. Same concept if I were to go and grab a portrait. Let's go maybe here. If I were to go and grab a portrait, make it a little bit brighter. If I went down here to the effects panel and I just add a vignette, what's going to start to happen? See how it starts going over her head? So again, this would be a case where I would take that radial filter, bring the exposure down, and then I could just click and put a little spotlight right around there. So, good question, and yeah, there's definitely times where you'll want to have both little tricks up your sleeve there. All right, let's move it on down the line here. So let's take a look at one of the things that we can do inside of Lightroom if we have a super contrasty scene is we can merge these into an HDR, okay? Later on this afternoon in the 1 o'clock class, I'll cover a little bit more about getting into Photoshop and some layers. But if we can do this here, we can save ourselves some work. And Lightroom actually has a really good HDR tool. So if you look here, you know, and this is a great type of a scene. If you're shooting into the sun, if you're indoors, those are going to be really contrasty scenes. You know, a lot of times you've seen we can do a lot with exposure and shadows, but sometimes you can't do that much. So a super contrasty scene inside, shooting into the sun. What I'll usually do is I'll take 3 versions of the photo. Okay, I do -2, and then I'll do generally like what the camera will meter at, and then +2. Then from there we can go, we just shift click and select all of them. We go photo, photo merge, HDR. It's going to merge everything together for us. As it's doing that here, I'm going to see how it says deghost. So here, let's see if we turn on, there we go. If you turn on auto tone, I'm going to turn it on, when I do this I'm going to turn it on, and I'll explain to you what happens if you leave it off. But when you turn it on, it's going to give you, it's going to, you know, apply some automatic fixes here. What the deghosting does, God bless you. What the deghosting does is it gives you different versions of your water. So the water was moving, so if I switched from none, and I'll just go straight over to high, you're going to see it's going to pick a smoother version of the water. Because different versions existed in one of those 3 frames that I merged into this. It takes a long time, by the way. That's why I don't go through all the options, because you can see here. It's really not very presenter friendly. I found that out the hard way. Come on. There we go. So you see how it took a different version? If you weren't paying attention in that split second, it did take a different version of the water. So if you got something moving down there or whatnot, you can experiment a little bit with the deghosting options. And sometimes it'll, you know, if you had a boat going across a lake, if you had a car, if you had a person walking across, some of them will actually remove that. All right, so let's leave auto tone on, and let's hit merge. What's going to do is it's going to give you a new version of the photo here. It's going to merge it together and give you one brand new version of the photo that basically has the tonal information of 3 shots. All that exposure information from those 3 photos in one shot. And it does it in just under 25 minutes. So, it's really not too bad. Come on. You can do it. I know you can. There we go. So there's our new HDR version down here. All it did, when I picked auto tone, all it did was move the sliders for me. Right? So if I hit reset, that's what it would have been. It just moved the sliders for me. So I can go over here to my shadows. Look at the exposure. I can go all the way to black. Like I've got a huge amount of exposure information here. We can pull back on our highlights. You see, look at that. Look at all the sky it's bringing back. Throw a little bit of warmth in there. Optional, I'll click my whites and blacks. One of the things that I would do to this, just kind of make my job a little bit easier, would be, I don't want to boost the shadows anymore. I don't really even want to boost the exposure anymore. I kind of like everything back here. I could take the grad filter, and we've been using it to work on the sky, right? If I can help you with anything, it's to start to think about what you can do with these tools in different ways. So think about what the grad filter does, is it kind of applies everything in a line. So if you look down here at the bottom of your photo and you see this line of an area that's too bright, too dark, too anything, I just use the grad filter with positive exposure instead of negative like we did before. And now I can control that area. Same filter, same concept of what we did in the sky. I'm doing it in a different place. I can feather it up so it kind of blends nicely. Maybe make that a little bit warmer too. I think clarity will be a good one for this photo. And then, of course, if you guys insist, a little bit of a vignette. So this is a tough one. It's a tough one to give you a before and after. I mean, that was the before and after of the HDR, right? But our before really, our before is any one of 3 photos. It could have been that one, it could have been that one, so it's tough to give you a real before and after of that. All right, now, so I mentioned before, we can have Lightroom merge things for us and whatnot. Eventually, the time's going to come where we're going to want to do this manually ourselves. We're going to want to merge 2 photos together in some way. This class is kind of called, Lightroom Photoshop for landscape photographers. The way that I like to really utilize Photoshop is for things that I know are really difficult or that we can't do in the field. So one of those examples would be using a polarizer. So you ever use a polarizer on a wide-angle lens? If you do, what can happen is you get something like that, right? So I don't know what this is, probably 16 to 35, something like that. So if you throw a polarizer on that wide-angle lens, you get something like that. I don't personally use the polarizer a whole lot for the sky, right? It'll make your clouds a little bit more defined. It'll make your sky a little bit bluer sometimes. Not a bad thing. Those are things that if I wanted to make my sky a little bit bluer, I have a slider I could do that later on with. And I see people get into more trouble than not with a polarizer. So I don't use it for that a lot. But what I do use it for is to remove glare. So here's that structure that's off in the distance. If I go take a look at that versus that. So here is the polarized version. Here's the non-polarized version. See the difference? That's kind of white, loses some color, desaturated. That's got a lot of nice color saturation on it. And to make that look like this in Photoshop or Lightroom would be difficult. I'd have to recolor. It's not just going to be a saturation slider. So that's why I like to use a polarizer. And then if you look down here on the sand, the same thing. We just have less glare, more color. So knowing these things, we can start to think ahead of time. So I'm out there in the field. I know that this is going to happen. I'm ready for it. My camera's on a tripod. I take 2 shots. I take that one without the polarizer. I left the polarizer on. I just turned it so it wasn't affecting the photo. And then I took that shot with the polarizer turned up, kind of obviously pretty high because you get that little dip in the sky there. Whoops. Am I still on? Yeah. Sorry. All right. So I get that little dip in the sky. I got the original one. So here's what we'll do. We're going to shift-click and select both of them. I'm going to go up here to Photo, down here to Edit. If I just edit inside of Photoshop, it's going to place them both as separate documents into Photoshop. But if I go down here to open as layers in Photoshop, it will stack them on top of each other. So I'll do that option here. And so what's going to happen is going to give me one document with 2 layers stacked on top of each other. And there we go. So now I have, let's just call this polarized non. So now I got two different layers there. So the bottom one's the polarized one, the top one is the non-polarized one. So what do I want to do here? I want to get the sky from the top one, and I want to keep everything else from the bottom version. So here's the way to attack this, because it's going to be different for every one of your photos. You want to make, on the top layer, you want to make a selection of what you want to keep. Think about it that way. I want to make a selection of whatever I want to keep on that layer. So in this example here, I want to keep the sky. So I'll go over here and I'll take my quick selection tool. I will paint all along the sky there. Zoom in. You see it's selected too much of that, so my quick selection tool is a brush. Works like every other brush in Photoshop. Right bracket key makes it bigger, left bracket key makes it smaller. And then you see right now I'm in add mode. It's got a little plus on it. So if I hold down the Option or Alt key, I can go into subtract mode. And subtract out those edges that went too far in. So now I got my selection. Now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to add a layer mask to this. Okay? The way to think of it is your layer mask, when you click on your layer mask, what's selected stays, what's not selected goes away. So see what happened? The sky stayed and everything else got cut out, and it shows my layer underneath. So I'll do it one more time. All right, I got my selection. If you click on the layer mask icon, it's going to keep whatever's selected and it's going to hide whatever is not. So that's why if you look at that layer mask, see it's white and black there. And the nice part about it is just it's not a permanent change. I could always go back and I could paint over that layer mask. I could do something to it. I didn't erase these pixels away for good. So if you're trying to work non-destructively, that's a good thing to do. Okay? And then from there, so your workflow to go from Lightroom to Photoshop and back again, your workflow is going to be, you're in Photoshop, you just go to File, Save. You don't change the name, you don't have to change anything about it, just hit File, Save, close it. When you go back over here to Lightroom, you'll see now there's another copy of that file right here. And that's my new version of the photo. All right? Depending on how you work inside Lightroom, a lot of people use collections. You put your favorites in there. I would now take this and put this into the collection. This almost kind of replaces my pick of that photo shoot, because now this is really the photo that I'm going to print, I'm going to share, I'm going to start to do things with. If I ever wanted to re-edit it in Photoshop, I could just go File, Edit In, and open this up into Photoshop. Now, it's going to ask us a question. Do you want to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments? There's not really many times where you just want to edit a copy. But the other one could be Edit Original. So the way to think of this would be, did you do anything to it in Lightroom after? Then you want to edit a copy with the adjustments. If you didn't do anything to it in Lightroom, then you can just edit the original. Because the difference is when I edit original, it'll open this up with the layers intact. But if I edit a copy and it pastes the Lightroom adjustments on top of it, my layers will be gone. Okay, it flattens it for me. There. Let's take a look here. Ooh, this is a small one. This is a neat little trick for you, though. So, has anybody? Oh man, I'm not going to be able to make it happen. You ever load your photos into Lightroom, and you're importing your photos? You double-click on a photo, you jump over to your develop module, and you're looking at it, and it looks saturated and vibrant, and then it goes flat. Raise your hand if it's happened, just so I know that I'm not the only one. Okay, at least 2 of you. No. So here's what's happening, and I want to give you a way around, because one of the questions I get is like, why does it go flat? And I can explain to you why it goes flat, and then the follow-up is always, well, how do I stop it? And you really can't. So, but here's something that you can do. So the reason why it goes flat is because when you shoot in RAW, your camera embeds a JPEG in it. And that's actually, when you shoot in RAW, you're actually still seeing on the back of the camera, you're still seeing the JPEG, which is why it always looks good, it's bright, it's saturated, it's contrasty, yeah. And honestly, anything on the back of your camera, you can take a picture of a garbage can at a park, it looks good because it's small. So, but when you get it onto your computer screen, load it in the Lightroom, and then you watch all these things, they're bright, they're saturated, and they turn flat. And that's because at first, Lightroom is showing you the embedded JPEG. And then once you've decided, I'm going to go into the develop module and I want to edit this, it's got to go read all the raw information, and then it gets rid of that JPEG and it shows you the raw photo. But you say, hey, I want to shoot in RAW, I don't want settings applied to my photos. So here's what you can do. Set your camera on it doesn't even have to be on a tripod, but take a RAW photo and then take a JPEG of the same scene. All right? Bring them into Lightroom, get them set up next to each other. So if you go to, where'd it go here? Oh, if you go to your develop module, all right, when you look on this little toolbar here, by the way, can I give you another keyboard shortcut that you will need one day? I can't promise it'll be today or tomorrow, but you will need this. You will look down here, and this toolbar will be gone. I can't explain why. You will most likely have inadvertently hit the T key on your keyboard, and it goes away. It's even been such a problem that when you hit it, notice Adobe has even put something there that says press T to show the toolbar key again, to the toolbar again, because they know that this messes people up. But I mean, maybe your cat walks across your keyboard, so you're not sitting there, which happens. So anyway, it's the T key. If you're ever looking and you're like, where the heck is this? I know I've seen it in a video. I know somebody's talked about it. It's the T key. Like, make this list of like things that can go wrong in Lightroom, and then fixes. This should go on to your list. So that's the T key. All right. See this little option down here? It says RA, reference view. This came out in Lightroom last November-ish, last fall sometime. It's called reference view. I don't use it a lot, but it does come in handy for some stuff. So we're going to go and click on it and go into reference view. So what it says is drag a photo from the film strip to set the reference. Well, I am going to take my JPEG and set my reference. Okay? And then my other photo is my active photo. So now what happens is the idea behind this is you tweak your active photo until it looks like the reference. So some people use this for stylization. You know, they see a photo with a style that they like. Excuse me. And so they take a photo and they can tweak things to get it to look like that photo. Well, in our case here, it's pretty much going to be under camera calibration. When you shoot in RAW, these little profiles become available to you. If you shoot in JPEG, it's just going to say embedded, because it's already been done. It's already been done in camera. But when you shoot in RAW, all these little profiles become available to you, so you can click through and see which one matches the one that you have over in your reference. So I can tell you from experience as a landscape photographer, landscape and vivid are going to be pretty darn close. I can't even see that much of a difference. But landscape, that's a good one for that. So now if you look, if I turn it on and off, you'll see that that's what's giving me that view, that look to the photo. So here's what's cool about it is we can get out of reference view, and I can go over here to my left-hand side, and I can create myself a preset, turn on calibration, and call it landscape profile. Landscape, JPEG, lookalike, whatever you want to call it. All right? Landscape profile. I'll save it in my user presets here, hit create, and so now you can see here, shows up right down there. Okay? Now, not bad, right? If I got, let's say I'm looking at, a whole bunch of other photos over here, I could very easily just go down here and click on them. I could apply a preset to them. I could go over, if I'm in the develop module here, I could copy settings, I could paste. I've got ways to do it. But here's where it's neat, is if I go to file import when I'm bringing photos in, if you look over here on the right-hand side, under develop settings, I can go to my presets and I can choose that preset. So now as I bring my next photo shoot in, if it was a landscape photo shoot, then I can go in and I can just select that preset and it's going to tag it to all those photos, so I don't have to go and do it later. If you're a portrait photographer, do it for portraits. The portrait profile is actually, believe it or not, really good. It renders the skin tone usually really nicely. So make one for your portraits too. But that's a nice, easy way to do it without having to go and do it after the fact. All right. Oh, can I show you guys something? So I just got a hold of this. Anybody ever seen? It's not out yet. It's pretty neat. So it's a keyboard. Here, I'm gonna plug it in. It's called Loop Deck. Loop Deck. So let me see here. It's pretty neat. There we go. It's basically a keyboard of your develop module. So I know it's going to be hard for you guys to see. I mean, at the top left, it's got undo, redo. That big knob is your rotate crop tool. It's got saturation, so it's got all your color, HSL colors here, and then saturation and luminance, which means, if I want to move the reds but I want to do saturation, I hit reds. Look at my screen. I didn't say it's better. Huh? Why do we need anything? Why do I need the 7 camera bags in my closet? Because I got tired of the 6 before. Exactly. Sometimes it's just fun. So anyway, I think everybody works a little bit differently. I personally, I use a Wacom pen and tablet, and that's just because it doesn't necessarily, especially in Lightroom, it doesn't necessarily do anything different for me. It just feels better for editing. We could argue, brushing, there are certain things you can do with the pen and tablet. I actually don't use it for a lot of those. I just like the feel of using and the control I get with the pen and the tablet. So, some people, imagine you literally sit back at your desk, you can sit back and just, you're moving slider here. Here, where's my exposure? Exposure. You're kind of sitting back, you're just moving stuff around. Clarity. I gotta hand it to him at least for this, which is somebody has actually invented a peripheral for the computer for photographers. It's gotten really boring out there for the computer itself. The Wacom tablet is really the last thing, and that's been around forever. What's that? Wacom? You never heard of a Wacom tablet yet? Oh my God. W-A-C-O-M. It's a pen and a tablet. You hold a little pen, you got a pressure. It's pressure sensitive, so if you're brushing, if you're using a brush tool, the harder you press down, the more of the effect it lays down. The lighter you press, the less of the effect, which is kind of neat. Or you can do it like, spots in the sky. If you get a bigger one or a smaller one, it'll adjust the size of the brush. It's pretty cool. But this is pretty neat. Like I could say if you're sitting at a desk and you're kind of just sitting back, you want to see your before and after, hit the there, boom, boom, vibrance, saturation. Oh, I can zoom. It's got star ratings on it too. So if you look down there, you can do your star ratings, your color labels. It's a gadget. The price, I don't know offhand. What's that? No. No, because I haven't just, I think when you get a peripheral like that, it takes you a while to figure out if you like it or not. And that's why I would always suggest whenever you buy anything from that, I mean, this is also not paid advertising, but this is why I shop at B&H, because I can bring anything back, I brought microphones to do recording at home, and I had them delivered, and you know what, I was coming up here, I live in Florida, I was coming up here, and I had to send them back, and I'm like, this is great, I don't even have to send them back now. Like, I just brought them up with me in my bag yesterday. But I'd advise, like, whenever you buy, even, some people buy a Wacom pen and tablet and love it, some people buy it and hate it. Buy it from a place you can send it back. So, but here's one of the things I can tell you that they did right, though, is they made it more from a creative aspect. There's been other products that are similar to this that have come out, and it's been a little bit, to me, they've been a little bit too techy. These guys did it from much more of a creative aspect, I think, the way we would creatively kind of lay out a flow in there. Some of the other ones I've seen, there's so many keys you could never figure out what they did. You'd forget what they did because they had a limited space. So it's one of the things that I noticed about this that I liked. But I'm in that phase of, like, when I bought my Wacom pen and tablet, it took me 2 weeks to like it. So I'm in that phase of trying to figure out, how much can I use it. All right, so we saw all that stuff. All right, so I'm about to wrap up. I'm gonna cover the basics of a topic. There's no way I could even cover this topic, in this whole class if I did. But it's for landscape photographers. It's something that I hear a lot of questions about, and I can spend a few minutes and go over it with you guys, and hopefully give you enough ammo to figure out if you want to learn more about it. It's called luminosity masking. Okay? Anybody heard of luminosity masking? So just better. This is one of those things that it is resurfaced much more in the last few years. I don't know the best way. Here's what I'm going to say. I'll start off by saying it is a technique, it's a workflow, and I think it's for people that like to tinker. So think about it this way. And this is a true story. I have friends that own boats. Okay, I got one guy. He owns a boat. Whenever anything goes wrong, he goes to the dock and he's taking stuff apart and he's fixing it. And he's doing all this stuff. I got this other friend. It's like, if the battery goes bad, he's like, somebody fix it. He's not a tinkerer. He doesn't like to tinker. He doesn't like to get in there. He doesn't like to change things, do things. He'd rather have somebody else do it. The other guy, he's like, he can't understand that. He's like, I want to know my boat inside and out. The other guy's just like, I just want to use my boat. So I think if you were to take that over to editing, there's ways that we can draw, some similarities there, because there's 100 different ways to edit a photo. There's nobody in here that hasn't seen all these tutorials out there of people that did stuff exactly different than I just did it right here. My guess is you saw somebody that has sworn to you that curves is the only way to edit a photo, right? And I just told you, don't ever use curves. So there's a lot of different ways to use this stuff. So here's the deal. I can show you enough of this. It gets so deep that there's no way to show you all of it. I could show you enough of this that I can at least kind of whet your appetite for. So think of luminosity masking. What is it? Luminosity masking is getting a mask. And when I say mask, take that word mask and interpret it over to selection, 'cause that's really what they are. It's getting a selection of your highlights and your shadows, or your luminance, and once you have a selection of your luminance, your brighter parts of the photo, you then, just by reversing it, have your darker parts of your photo, right? So you get your bright parts, and it's basically getting control of your highlights and your shadows. It's essentially what luminosity masking is, okay? So let's I'm going to open up a photo over here, and here we can actually open up this one. So here we got this image over here inside of Lightroom. Go to my develop module. It's basically, I took black and I just did a tool in Photoshop that would just gradiate this in chunks over to white. So let's take this. I'm going to edit this inside of Photoshop. So what I can do is I can use selection tools inside of Photoshop, and there's a little trick. If we go to our channels panel, and I command or control click on this RGB channel, I've essentially just selected the luminance of this photo. And we're gonna equate this to a real photo in a second. I've just selected the luminance of the photo. So now let's go to brightness and contrast. All right? If I want to make the luminance brighter, which is the brighter parts of the photo, I drag this to the right. Notice it stops right around here, give or take. If I want to make the luminance, or the brighter parts, darker, I go over here. Right? Cool. So that's a luminosity mask. I just created a mask or selection of the luminosity of my photo, and now I can do things with it. Once I have that mask or selection, I can do something with it. I can add color to it, I can remove color from it, I can make it brighter, darker, sharpen it, add detail, whatever. So let's press Command or Control J. All right, I'll hide that layer. Now, this is my mask over here, right? Well, if I go to Image Adjustments and Invert, what it does is that it flips that mask exactly the opposite. So what did I just do? That mask, or remember, we're equating mask with the word selection. That selection is now the opposite of the luminance, which is the darker stuff. Okay? So let's go back over here to our adjustment layer. So now I have access on this layer to the darker stuff in my photo. So if I want to take the darker stuff and make it brighter, I know it's tough to see, but you'll see this core bright area in the middle isn't really moving. It's really happening to the darker stuff out there and some of the tones of gray. And if I want to go the opposite, and I want to make the darker stuff darker, again, look at the center. It's not really messing with it. So now, let's move that over here. Go to my Channels panel, Command or Control click on the RGB, which gives me a selection of the luminance, and I'll go to Brightness and Contrast. So it almost looks like it's just a black and white version of the photo, but it really is a selection that targets the luminance. So now when I go over here, if I want to, I have the luminance selected, the bright stuff. If I want to make the bright stuff darker, I go here. If I want to make the bright stuff brighter, I go here. Same thing we did before. Command or Control J. Go to my mask over here, I'll invert it. Adjustments, invert. And now I have access to my darker stuff, right? Want to make the darker stuff brighter, look. See the shadowy areas? Or if I want to make them darker, go the opposite. So, in simplest terms, they get much more difficult, all right? And there's more stuff you can do with it. In simplest terms, we just created 2 basic luminosity masks, right? One for the luminance, and then once we have access to the luminance, we just reverse it. And now we got access to the dark stuff. Years ago, before Camera Raw, Camera Raw was a plug-in to, believe it or not, Camera Raw was just a plug-in to Photoshop. I think you even had to buy it in the beginning. Before Camera Raw, before all the cool fun tools now, before Lightroom, before all this stuff, when I opened up a photo and I started using Photoshop and I wanted to work on the shadows and the highlights, that's what I had to do. I had to make selections of the luminance and reverse them and do all these things to get access to all these different parts of the photo. That's where luminosity masks were created. Like everybody says, film's coming back now. It's not really coming back, but I think it's fun to experiment. It's like people with luminosity masks is coming back. It's not better or different, whatever. It's just a different way to do something. So if what you just saw looks very, very similar to shadows and highlights, you are correct. It's just doing the work for us behind the scenes. All right? What you can't see, and I always wish I had I worked for On One for like a year, and I got to play with some beta versions, and when I would move shadows and highlights, the developers they would have the masks visible, and you could actually see the mask that the software automatically builds. Because that's what's happening. When I go to shadows over here, Lightroom has a mask in its memory of what it thinks are the shadows for this photo. And so you're not exposed to it. But if shadows, highlights, that's essentially what a luminosity mask is. So to bring it back to what I said before, there's the guy that likes to tinker, and there's the guy that doesn't and kind of just wants to turn it on and turn it off and be done with it. There's nothing wrong with either side. There's places for all of us. So my only hope is I kind of give you guys some ammo. Maybe you're the person that likes to tinker. Sometimes I like to tinker a little bit more. If I really like the photo and I want to do a little bit more with it, I know I'm going to print it big, I tinker a little bit more with it. So if you're the kind that likes to tinker, luminosity masks are probably something that you might want to look a little bit more into. You're generally going to have to buy a panel system. There's one, Tony Kuiper. I can get you one if you're interested afterwards. I can get you. We can look for links. But Tony Kuiper is one. Jimmy McIntyre is another guy that makes them. But they make these panel systems that go into Photoshop that build all these things for you. And so most people that do luminosity masking get a panel system for it. So just a topic I hear a lot about. Can't do it justice in even 2 hours, but hopefully gives you a little bit of ammo on if it's something that you want to be interested in. So, all right, guys, I'm going to wrap my stuff up here. Anybody, you guys got any questions?
How do you make contact from Lightroom?
A contact sheet?
Yes.
In contact sheet in Lightroom, let's go to a folder with a whole bunch of photos here. You go over to your print module, and you're going to go into the very, very top layout style one that says single image / contact sheet. And then you see over here on the left-hand side under your templates, you'll actually see that there's contact sheet presets. And you can control them all. There's margins, and there's the cells and the rows and the columns. The only trick is, it's a big trick if you don't know it. If you just select one photo in the film strip, that's all you're ever going to see. So you have to go to select all. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. Yeah. Try to make a 13 by 19 print. The thing won't do it. All right, so for whatever size print you're trying to make, the first place you're going to start is you're going to go over here to your page setup. Under your page setup, you're going to choose your printer. So I use the Epson P800, and then you're going to choose your paper size. So I'll go to 13 by 19. The trick that you're probably not, you might have missed, or it might not have been on the settings at the top, and if you don't go in here and choose it, is you have to choose borderless. If you just choose 13 by 19, it leaves a margin. If you choose the borderless option, you can see it on the screen there. Choose the borderless option. Now, if you look in your, let's go to single image. Now, if you go on here, you'll see, I can get them all the way up there. Yes, sir.
Presets. I don't know if you're going to go over it on your next class, but you can say presets in Photoshop as well as in Lightroom?
You can you could. Photoshop has a few different places where it'll save presets. Most of your adjustment layers will have presets inside of them. Layer styles will have presets. They're a little bit different from Lightroom. I don't use them quite as much. I am going to go through, there's a color lookup table function in Photoshop that I use the presets quite a bit for. I'll go over that in the later class, but yeah. Yes?
Regarding versions of the file, which one would you, because I saw you were working on the JPEG and NEP. I mean, for instance, I usually take both NEP, RAW and JPEG. But which one would you prefer to be working with? NEP, RAW or JPEG?
If you use, well, so the question was which, if you didn't hear, which one, if you take RAW and JPEG, which one do I prefer working on? I think you mentioned that you saw that I have a few of both. If you saw that I have some JPEGs, a lot of times it's just my demo files. I shoot 100% in RAW, unless I shoot sports, and I usually shoot in JPEG. But I shoot in RAW. If you use Lightroom, there really is no preference because Lightroom doesn't really distinguish between RAW or JPEG. So you'll never see a difference between the two. I shoot in RAW because I do mostly landscapes, and it's that extra flexibility I get with the highlights and the shadows. You won't get that with a JPEG. So that extra flexibility keeps me from maybe taking a darker version for the sky and a brighter version for the foreground and having layered them together if I shot in JPEG, because I wouldn't be able to open up the shadows and pull back the highlights as much. So I shoot in RAW, and I prefer to edit them, but Lightroom doesn't really distinguish, so you won't notice a difference. Yes?
Do you keep all your memory cards, or do you download them beforehand?
Do I keep all my memory cards?
Or do you reuse all your cards?
I don't have enough money to use a new card every time.
Some people are afraid to get rid of it.
Really? Well, no, you are absolutely right, because I talk to people all the time that actually still have all of their photos on their memory cards. That would get expensive for me if I bought new memory cards every time I went on a shoot. So no, so my process is when I get back, I download my photos I have an external hard drive. I download my photos to my external hard drive, and I have a clone of that hard drive nearby, and usually once a week or once however often I'm okay with losing photos, I clone it over to that duplicate hard drive. So I've got them on my one drive, and I always have a copy on the other. Once I have that copy, I'll usually format over the memory card. So no, we laughed at that question, but number one, there's somebody in here, I won't ask, but there's somebody in here that does it. I guarantee it. There always is at a workshop. Get 2 copies safe of your photos, and you're good to go. 3 is even better.
Doesn't it automatically go from one external hard drive to the backup?
Lightroom has a, so the question was, does it automatically go from the external drive to the backup? Lightroom has a backup feature when you do the import. It's just weird. It's weird, it doesn't, and how it names things, and it doesn't, so my personal Lightroom workflow is I put my photos onto my drive first, and then I back them up myself. But I do my import straight from there. I don't let Lightroom import them directly from my card reader. I put them on my drive first, and then when I'm inside of Lightroom, I go to File, Import, and I choose the Add option. And that way I just point it at the drive that has my photos. I don't have to worry about Lightroom putting it somewhere I didn't want it to. I don't have to worry about it making a copy. I don't have to worry about anything. It just literally sees them there and brings them in. Yeah.
When you're importing, and I have to say a lot on the camera, so I check everything, just check the ones that I want to go in. Now it seems to be, as it comes on the screen, I get the photographs from all over the place. They're not lined up the way they normally would be,
You get photographs as you import from, are they on that camera?
Right, I will get one that was like there the time before, even though I unconnected. I will mix up, and they won't be in order anymore.
They're not in order in the import. I don't know about that one. I'll have to look into that. All right, we good on questions? Cool. Guys, everybody online, I didn't get to talk to you, but thank you. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you.